All right, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us for today's webinar on managing wild and scenic rivers. This is the first webinar in our 2022 Wild and Scenic webinar series. My name's Angie Furman, and I'm the River Training Center Coordinator for River Management Society. For those of you who may be unfamiliar, River Management Society is working to advance the profession of river management. We provide a unique variety of forums for sharing information about the appropriate uses and use and management of river resources. Our members include federal, state, local, tribal river managers and rangers. We have outfitters and guides, planners and landscape architects, alluvial geomorphologists, environmental lawyers and policymakers, students, professors, researchers, authors, and more. You can see it's a whole collection of people who work on and around rivers. Also, I wanted to highlight that for those who might not know, becoming an RMS member gives you instant access to this network of professionals. We have a member directory, a moderated listserv, and you'll also receive free publications like the biweekly news digest and quarterly RMS journal. We also have member discounts on some of our training opportunities, such as this webinar series, as well as for our symposium and some professional purchase deals. Before we get started, I just want to point out that today's presentation is being recorded and will be available usually within a day on the RMS video channel. To get there, you can go to the RMS website, go to the Professionals tab, visit the River Training Center webpage, and then once on the webpage, you can go to the video channel. I also wanted to point out that once this video is posted, there are also going to be links to PDF copies of today's slides, as well as the handout in the video description. Also, today's material tracks with information found in Module 7 of the Wild and Scenic Rivers course of study. If you're unaware, this is a free and self-directed learning resource that can be accessed on rivers.gov by going to the Resources tab and then clicking on Wild and Scenic River Training Modules. Rivers.gov is an extremely useful website from the Interagency Wild and Scenic Rivers Coordinating Council. If you're unfamiliar, I highly encourage you to go check it out and see all the wonderful resources that are provided there. I also would like to point out that we have a handout associated with today's webinar that we may refer to, but also includes a lot of helpful links and the contact information for today's presenters. This can be accessed through the handout tab on your control panel. And at the same time, here's a couple other features. The little orange button will open or close the control panel. And you'll see down here, we've got the little handout tab. We're highly encouraging you to ask questions, participate today. In order to do that, you can go to the questions tab and type your question in there, and that will be sent right to us, to the organizers. And we're going to try to answer as many of them as possible. I do have my colleague Risa Shimoda, who's joining me in the background today to help field some of the questions to our presenters. And we'll be taking breaks throughout, as well as have time at the end of the presentation to answer these questions. Without further ado, I'd like to invite today's presenters, Tangy and Bobbie Joe, to introduce themselves. So I will start with you, Tangy.
My name's Tangy Ekasi-Otu, and I came to work with the Forest Service not too long ago, about 2 years ago, through the Resource Assistance Program in partnership with the Hispanic Access Foundation. And I joined the Washington office staff who work on the Wilderness and the Wild and Scenic Rivers program. And since then have been doing a lot of work alongside Wild and Scenic Rivers program and in partnership with RMS as well. And I've been able to present a few different types on kind of fundamentals of Wild and Scenic Rivers. So excited to be here with you guys today and to share some information.
I'm Bobbie Roshone, and I'm a park ranger with the National Park Service. And I'm currently working at Niobrara National Scenic River, and I've been here for about 7 years, including my seasonal time. And before that, I worked at Ozark National Scenic Riverway. I'm also co-producing this with my son. We're both homesick right now, so if you hear some screaming in the background, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Tangy and Bobbie. We're really lucky to have you both with us today. Before we get started in the presentation, we want to learn a little bit about you. So we've got an introduction poll that I'm going to launch here, and we're just going to run it for a quick few seconds. So hoping to learn what you're getting out of this, what you'd like to get out of this webinar today, whether you're new to this, you're brushing up on some knowledge, you're here for the photos or other. If you are here for another reason, feel free to put that into the question box and communicate that with us. I'm going to give it about 5 more seconds here. I see majority of people have voted. All right. Now I'm going to share those results. Looks like majority of people are here to tune up their knowledge on wild and scenic rivers, but we also do have a good amount of you who are new to this. So that's exciting for us. Again, welcome, and hope you find some of this information valuable. So now I'm going to pass it on over to Tangy to get us started.
Okay, so we're all sorted now. I got my webcams arranged because my bandwidth isn't very good today. But let's kick off with just identifying some of the training objectives today. And so today we'll mostly be focusing on key phrases of the day, protecting and enhancing river values, and considerance of their river classification with all of the provisions that are provided in the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and then considering strategies for stewardship in cooperation with other groups and agencies for wild and scenic rivers. So the main goals that we'll be able to reach today after this webinar is being able to describe the basic requirements and responsibilities for river managers, other stakeholders, and other groups, including state and federal agencies, and how they work together to protect and enhance the river values. And then Bobbie will also walk us through the hierarchy of management direction that comes from the Act. And that includes some agency-specific management guidance. The first section of the webinar will cover the management responsibilities, and then we'll move into law, regulation, and policy. And then we'll kind of get into how you leverage those things to protect the river values that we've outlined and defined. And then we'll get into other provisions of the Act and specific agency guidance on stewardship, and then we'll provide opportunities for Q&A. So the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, let's get into the background behind how it was developed and implemented. It was enacted in 1968, and the public and Congress recognized the importance of protecting the nation's most precious rivers, in particular their free-flowing condition. This also includes their water quality and other values that are unique to each of the rivers, which we'll be able to define later. And from the original 8 wild and scenic rivers, the national system has now grown to more than 200 designated rivers. The national system of wild and scenic rivers is a conservation-minded system, And the intent is to protect those rivers for the benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations. And really as a complement to the construction of dams and other civil works. And alongside of that, the national system really complements other conservation purposes because riparian environments are so critical to all different types of landscapes. So in regards to management responsibilities, federal river managers work alongside a lot of other people, again, with the main goal to protect and enhance the values of rivers added to the system by Congress. There are different forms and paths to designation, and some are actually designated at the request of a governor of the state to the Secretary of the Interior. And those are state-administered wild and scenic rivers, and there are also partnership rivers. The rivers that are added to the national system by an act of Congress are administered by the Secretary of Agriculture or the Department of the Interior. And each of the land management agencies displayed here are responsible for administering those designated rivers. So the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the National Park Service. And I referenced partnership rivers before, and the National Park Service is primarily responsible for administering those. And those are really cool rivers that have a lot of momentum, investment, and support from adjacent communities and state governments. And so you can find more information on partnership rivers in Module 12. So today we're just going to touch on congressional intent, and this is what really unifies and gives consistent direction from the Act for each of the land management agencies in the ways that they go about managing the rivers. So coming back to and taking a closer look at this term protect and enhance, which is expressed in section 1B and 10A of the Act, there are three purposes or values that are critical to be protected and enhanced for each of the rivers. And so that includes the free flowing condition, the water quality, and the outstandingly remarkable values. These are the unique values for any given river that stand out or are remarkable on some kind of regional scale, and they're referred to as ORVs. So all three of these elements together are referred to as the river values. So in regards to free flowing condition, this is the principal purpose that is mentioned in section 1B of the Act. And then it's further defined as existing or flowing in a natural condition without impoundment, diversion, straightening, riprapping, or other modifications of the waterways. So if you need to, call up your hydrologic engineer to get a closer look at some of those terms, that's perfectly okay. But it's also important to note that rivers that do have, low dams or diversion work, other minor structures, they're not excluded from being added to the national system. It's just that the future intent is that these types of project proposals would not be, it would not be the goal to further the development or diversion of those waterways after designation. In regards to water quality, this is one of the critical river values that is established for all designated rivers, and a lot of the rivers in the National Wild and Scenic River System actually provide critical sources of drinking water for urban areas and folks all across the country. And so the protection mandate is found in section 1B of the Act. The outstandingly remarkable values is also referenced in section 1B of the Act. And there are a few different unique categories that can be used to describe some of the values that are present in the river corridor. And some of the common ones that are designated are scenic values, recreational values, geologic formations even, fish and wildlife species, history, and culture. And then there's a whole category for other, and there's been a few different unique designations that have fallen under that category as well. Now, when it comes to protecting these 3 river values, the Act really encourages federal river managers to partner with both state and local agencies, and they work together to plan and provide management direction with other entities and the public. And this portion of the Act that encourages these partnerships also clarifies that the state roles are essentially unaffected by Wild and Scenic designation. So it's really important that any river manager has a full picture of the network of folks that they work with in order to administer the river. So taking a closer look at the state partners, this is highly encouraged in Section 10E of the Act, and it also provides that general authority for federal-state partnerships to happen. And one of the examples that you can find is the North Umpqua Federal State Wild. It's jointly managed by the federal manager and state manager through a formal partnership, and they actually work together to develop the comprehensive river management plan in the state of Oregon. Now, in regards to the states and landowners, private organizations, and individuals, the Act, particularly Section 11, discusses how they can work together to plan, protect, and manage the river resources together. It also describes activities that happen on non-federal lands that might have an impact on the Wild and Scenic River corridor. Because rivers are so dynamic and interconnected, what happens upstream can impact what happens downstream. And so there's discussions for relationship building to talk about activities that happen in and near the river corridor and how that impacts the river itself. And as far as management responsibilities, when the management plan is being developed, any of these partnerships should be properly documented through a formal written agreement, because this is what really ensures that public interests and private landowner rights are protected. So in addition to state and local organizations, other federal agencies outside of the 4 land management agencies are also directed to protect Wild and Scenic River values in alignment with their missions. And so this applies to activities conducted by any federal agency that are within or approximate to the designated river. And so I'll provide a few examples of other agencies that have consistent involvement with the rivers. So in regards to Section 12A, this is where the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is referenced. So the Corps of Engineers issues nationwide permits for any sort of in-water work in the U.S. And their authority comes from the Clean Water Act and also the Rivers and Harbors Act. So no activity under this program can occur in a designated river without a written determination from the river administering agency. And the river administering agency has a responsibility to do an evaluation of proposed water resource projects on the river and then come to conclusion whether those projects would have an adverse effect on the river's values. Another close partner, federal partner, in administering Wild and Scenic Rivers is the Environmental Protection Agency, because they have a large network of state water quality agencies where they work together to address any water quality concerns on designated rivers. And so the river administering agency is required to actively evaluate the existing water quality and then identify future limitations and then work together to define and develop a long-term strategy to address any of the water quality issues. And so, for example, the Upper Deschutes Scenic River really leans into a state partnership so that they can have consistent data collection, and then they, work on actions to address water quality with the state as well, who oftentimes has the capacity to do a lot of the data collection and monitoring too. And again, in regards to the states, in Section 13 of the Act, it clarifies that the jurisdiction and the responsibility of the states is essentially unaffected by law and scenic river designation. So to kind of clarify the nature of maybe that sort of partnership or relationship, that means that there is a partnership opportunity, but the state's responsibilities remain. But there can be collaboration regarding, fish and wildlife regulating, water rights claims, interstate compacts, and navigable waters. But it's very important to develop effective partnerships with state agencies. And then in order to provide an example, this Tangy Wild and Scenic River kind of gives a better picture of what that relationship looks like. So they have detailed guidance for protecting and enhancing the outstandingly remarkable fisheries value in their management plan. And the actions that they included in regards to protecting the fisheries value includes recommendations that were developed for the State Fish and Wildlife Agency with an emphasis on restoration efforts and projects for the native salmonids. And so the state of Oregon in that case still retains its full jurisdiction over the fisheries, but the federal administering agency is the one who can develop the recommendations for their relationship and cooperation. So in summary, regarding responsibilities, responsibility includes identifying and protecting and enhancing the main river values, which includes free-flowing condition, water quality, and outstandingly remarkable values. And the way that is carried out is through partnerships. Federal river administering agencies work with other federal agencies. They work with state and local governments, and they work with many stakeholders who care about the river. So now we can do a quick poll to see if anybody caught the groups that are specifically involved in various sections of the Act. There are a few references here and there in the presentation, but if you can remember and identify the groups that are referenced in the Act that the federal agency is encouraged to have partnership with and through in order to protect and enhance river values, can test your knowledge with a quick poll.
We'll give it another couple seconds here. I see a bunch of answers coming in. All right, I'm going to close the poll and share answers.
There's a pretty hefty lag on the screen on my end, but I can see that you were able to get the poll up there. Okay, so the most complete answer in this case is D, state and local government, landowners, private organizations, individuals, and the EPA as well. And so more information on collaboration with state and local governments can be found in Section 10. And then there's authority in Section 11 to provide technical and limited financial assistance for landowners, private organizations, and individuals who are often encouraged to participate in the planning process. And then section 12 also references cooperation with the EPA regarding state water quality. So now I'm going to turn it over to Bobbie.
And Bobbie, just before you begin, I did see only one question has come through so far, and I just want to quickly answer that. For those who may have joined late, there will be a PDF copy of the slides provided afterwards, along with the handout and the recording. So if you're looking to get a copy of these slides, those will be available afterwards. So that's the only question so far. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Bobbie.
Thank you, Angie. So we're talking about law, regulation, and policy, and I am sorry if my voice comes in and out. Like I said, I've been sick the last few days, and hopefully I can get through this without losing my voice. So here we go. As a river manager, you're going to want to know how to apply the hierarchy of agency direction associated with managing the river consistent with the legal and technical requirements. And understanding this hierarchy will help guide the decision making for a variety of situations. So that's good. No. The hierarchy of direction for complying with Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is similar to other laws passed by Congress. You can think of the hierarchy in some ways as an inverted pyramid. On top are the laws, including the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, which federal agencies must follow. Federal laws can also be changed by Congress. Regulation must be, I can't talk today, developed at the departmental level by a federal agency through a public rulemaking process to comply with one or more portions of the law. The final regulations are incorporated into the Code of Federal Regulation, or the CFRs, and may only be changed to other administrative rulemaking procedure. While regulations have slightly less force than law, they generally have more force in agency policy and direction, in which may or may not have gone through the public rulemaking process. The law and any other relevant regulation will form the basis for the individual agency policy. Other guidance, such as interagency Wild and Scenic Rivers Coordinating Council products, may inform policy, agency policy. You can imagine law, regulation, and policy as following through a funnel with the highest order of direction, the law applying to every federal agency. The next highest order of direction is regulation, which generally applies to multiple federal departments, one department or an agency. And finally, in the hierarchy is a specific agency policy and direction. Agency decisions for how to manage Wild and Scenic Rivers include consideration of all of these levels of direction. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act directs how rivers in the national system are to be managed to meet the congressional intent expressed in Section 1B and 10A and through the other provisions of the Act. In some cases, legislation that amends that Act or the Act to add to the river to the national system includes river-specific direction. For example, Congress provided the direction for cooperative management of a designated river and recognized a comprehensive river and management plan developed during the study process on the Farmington, Wild and Scenic Rivers in Massachusetts. The legislation for horse pastures, Wild and Scenic River in North Carolina includes specific language to allow for federal acquisition of lands within the river corridor that would otherwise have not been allowed under Section 6 of the Act. And then my river, Niobrara, the Congress added a specific limitation on land acquisition by the federal administrating agency, which is the National Park Service, and established an advisory council to provide guidance on the development of the plan and management of the river, which is kind of a really unique agreement. Other federal laws may apply within a Wild and Scenic River corridor. A river manager should be familiar with the complementary laws such as the Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, the Archaeological Resource Protection Act, National Historic Preservation Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, as well as others laws applicable to your specific agency. So it's good to know a little bit of the background and resources on those as well. There's a few other ones that popped up on there as well. The Department of Agriculture has regulation also used as guidance for the Department of Interior river administrating agencies for evaluating river resource projects under Section 7 of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act at 36 Code of Federal Regulations as Part 297. Numbers give me problems today. Each agency has a unique federal regulation for prohibitions or use limitations. For instance, refer to 36 CFR Part 261 for U.S. Forest Service prohibitions, and refer to 36 CFR Parts 7 and 13 for special regulations on some NPS wild and scenic rivers. Special and supplementary rules are regulations that provide restrictions or limitations needed to protect and enhance river values. For the BLM, a river manager can establish a wild and scenic river special rule under 43 CFR 8351.2-1. Supplementary rules can be established under 43 CFR 8365.1-6 for public land adjacent to the river corridor, including developed recreational sites. Subordinate to the law, regulation, each of the 4 federal river administrating agencies has policy and guidance that provides additional interpretation of the Act. The Bureau of Land Management's direction is found in the BLM Manual 6400, Wild and Scenic Rivers. Policy and program direction for identification, evaluation, planning, and management. The National Park Service direction is found in the Director's Order number 46, Wild and Scenic Rivers, and accompanying reference manual. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Manual 602 FW3, Comprehensive Conservation Planning Process. And then the U.S. Forest Service direction is found in the Forest Service Manual 2354, and then the River Recreation Management in the Forest Service Handbook 1909.12, Chapter 80, Wild and Scenic River Evaluation. And then, Angie, do we have links for those in case people were wondering?
Yeah, they are in the handout.
Okay.
They are listed, and they should link from those that are listed in the handout.
Perfect. Just wanted to make sure. Okay. And moving on to that. Yeah. All of this law, regulation, and agency policy is implemented through a management direction developed in agency land use and general land management plans, and the Comprehensive River Management Plan, or CRMP, required for each congressionally designated river by Section 3D1 of the Act. So we're going to look at some examples. This first one, this example illustrates how direction from an agency planning document guides restoration efforts on the Big Marsh Creek, Wild and Scenic River in Oregon. At one time, the marsh was privately owned, and it allowed domestic livestock grazing in the marsh. The creek diverted into 2 ditches based on the direction of the Deschutes National Forest Land and Resource Management Plan and the Big Marsh Creek, CRMP. The diversion ditches were filled with rock and earthen material and revegetated, with other sections breached to restore the natural floodplain characteristics of the marsh, which is kind of a neat process when they went in and did that. The first general direction from the land management resource management plan establishes management guidelines for protecting and enhancing the river values of several eligible rivers prior to designation. And then next, building from the more general direction of the land resource management plan, and the CRMP developed a more specific direction regarding restoration of the Big Marsh Creek. Finally, the restoration project was implemented through a project-specific decision that included an evaluation under Section 7A of the Act. So that's kind of a neat one. So now we're going to see how well you guys can identify which one it falls under, if it's law, regulation, or policy. So this exercise will allow you to test your understanding of those different levels of authority for protecting the Wild and Scenic River values. And just to consider the following statement and indicate what level of authority each represents, and you can do that in the chat. So, Wild and Scenic Rivers shall be managed to protect and enhance their free flow water quality and outstandingly remarkable values. Is that a law, or the law, regulation, or the policy associated with it? Any guesses? It would be the law, the Wild Scenic Rivers Act itself. Okay, monitor type, an amount of visitor use on the Riffle Creek WSR trail after snowmelt to determine whether the trail use has caused trail width expansion or loss of drainage features. Is that example of the law, regulation, or policy? So it'd be actually an example of a policy. Thank you, Angie. I think there's, yep. This one is fires prohibited in the river corridor from May 15th to October 30th annually. Is that an example of a law, regulation, or a policy? I wish we had Jeopardy theme music for this. It would be regulation. So it's kind of interesting how each one of those fall under different things. So beyond law, regulation, and policy, the river manager should be familiar with other guidance that is very helpful for managing wild and scenic rivers. Consider the joint guidelines developed by the Secretaries of the Interior and Agriculture in 1982 for study and management of designated rivers, and the many technical reports and other products of the Interagency Wild and Scenic River Coordinating Council. A river manager should also be aware of existing agreements for cooperation and partnerships. In 1982, the Secretaries of the Interior and Agriculture published guidelines for the study of potential wild and scenic rivers and management of designated rivers, fully titled as the Departments of the Interior and Agriculture Interagency Guidelines for Eligibility, Classification, and Management of River Areas, and commonly referred to as the Interagency or Secretary's Guidelines. This guidance has not been updated to reflect the 1986 generic amendments to the Act, including direction to develop a CRMP. Specific to river management, it provides the still contemporary interpretation of the protect and enhance language of Section 10A as a non-degradation and enhancement policy for all designated rivers, regardless of classification. While its guidance has been largely supplemented by council products and agency direction, its definitions of user capacity have been referenced in recent court opinions. The Interagency Wild and Scenic Rivers Coordinating Council, or Council, has since its inception in 1995 developed a myriad of products for river managers and other federal and state agency staff and the public. The council consists of national and field level representatives from the 4 federal river administrating agencies. While not a decision-making body, its products provide clear, detailed information for river managers and the public and serve as the basis for further individual agency actions. For example, the evaluation procedures outlined in the council's technical report, Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, Section 7, have been incorporated into the agency manual and handbook direction. You may find its technical reports and the comprehensive river management plans and many other products on the website at www.rivers.gov, which is there on the screen. One second. There are a variety of types of agreements that may also guide the implementation of river management plans. The river manager should consult with the appropriate subject matter experts to develop a memorandum of understanding or interagency agreements or partnership agreements for river protection and management. For example, management of the river boating permit system on the lower Deschutes Wild and Scenic River is through a cooperative agreement that specifies the roles and responsibilities of the BLM, state of Oregon, and the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs to protect and enhance river values. So speak to the value of experience manager discretion and resolution of conflict decisions. Remember, river management consists of varying degrees of complex considerations in law. It's not an easy process, and policy don't exist in a vacuum separate from their social context. The planning relationships and decision factors are not always linear, but can be thought of as a complex cycle of feedback loops and adaptive responses to provide the best outcomes consistent with the purpose of the designation under the law, which is to ensure the protection of rivers values for present and future generations. Hopefully that gives you some insight into the law and policy framework that is applied to designated rivers. Coulter, now we're going to go back to Tangy, and she's going to help you out with the next stage.
Thanks, Bobbie.
Thank you for really outlining different levels of direction for the designated river. So now we're going to come back to the river values, and we're going to take a closer look at how we go about providing protection for those values. And we'll cover sort of the importance to be able to document the current conditions of those. So how would you characterize the values? How do you describe them? What elements do you use to measure them? And then we'll also talk about situations where a management plan hasn't yet been completed for a river, or where river values aren't fully described, and then where you can go from there in regards of making management decisions in that kind of case. So in regards to the first two values, the free-flowing nature of the river and the water quality, in Section 1B of the Act, the free-flowing condition and the water quality are identified as values that apply to all rivers. So it doesn't matter the type of designation within the system. If it's a wild and scenic river, these two aspects are mandated to be protected. So it's really key to be able to describe their condition at the time of designation, because that's what sets up the foundation for developing a monitoring plan into the future. And the monitoring data is what gives us a closer look to be able to reflect on if management actions are really meeting the non-degradation and enhancement policy for the values. Now, the outstandingly remarkable values actually play a really unique role in the management of the river, and they also play a role in the development of the management plan itself. And just as the other values need a detailed description, so do the river values. Describing what makes them unique and what makes them remarkable on the river is critical. And it's really important to be able to describe them as well, so that folks who come in contact with the river and want to form a connection and a relationship with it can understand the values that are present there. So the language used to describe this is really important. It's important that all partners and community members are aware of those values. The ORVs also help to establish the corridor boundary for the river during the planning process, because the boundary should shift in order to include any of the outstandingly remarkable values that have been designated. For example, if there's a scenic value, the boundary could be modified to include that, or if there's really critical habitat for wildlife species that's protected in the corridor, it can also be adjusted to include that. The desired conditions for the outstandingly remarkable values also really guide the management direction for the river as a whole. So for example, if a fisheries value is designated for the river, the plan could identify future riparian restoration projects to be implemented into the future. And so it's really critical, again, to take a close look at the date of designation at the ORVs, so that they can be described in clear detail, so that a monitoring strategy can be used over time to track how they are being impacted. Now, in regards to those existing and desired conditions, it's often, you can find more information in find a baseline of information on these things and a pre-designation study, because oftentimes rivers are studied and evaluated before they're designated, or a resource assessment, which could be done by a natural resource specialist for different elements in the river corridor, you know, and the habitat there as well. And oftentimes that's where we can find some of that information. And the description should really be as specific as possible in regards to the values, and definitely include the location whenever it's relevant. And then just, you know, managers and other folks responsible for administering the river, the more they can kind of keep that knowledge of the baseline and the desired conditions for the values in the forefront of their minds, the easier it is to really shape and guide management decisions. And in regards to like language and writing and communication, there's a module, it's module number 6, that really describes the key elements of a good description for conditions of river values.
Quick plug, we're also going to be having a webinar specifically on outstandingly remarkable values in May as part of this series.
Thanks, Angie. Yeah, I mean, describing those is like, it's fundamental, and there's requirements, but it's really an art, you know, and it's well done. So you can get more information there. So let's kind of dive into something that's interesting about our national system of rivers. Not all of them actually have completed plans, because it's a pretty heavy lift to complete a comprehensive river management plan. And so at the same time, once a river has been designated, it's still afforded the same protections as other rivers that do have management plans. And so a common question is, can management actions be taken in the river corridor if the plan's not complete? So technically the answer is yes, but the guiding factor is that the activity should be determined to protect the river values. And so it's critical that there's a detailed description of the values. So in some cases, again, that information could be found in a pre-designation study. However, it really could be necessary to conduct a resource assessment to be able to really validate the outstandingly remarkable values. So it's just critical to note that there's a lot of limitations in evaluating a management action or making any sort of decision under NEPA without detailed descriptions. So leaning into opportunities to develop a really robust management plan in an efficient way gives the maximum support for management actions that are taken on the river. So along with having knowledge of the river values, you can also lean on the broad legal direction that's found in the Act. And so there's 3 themes kind of listed here, aspects of the river that are described that provide more direction for how the river should be administered. And so I'll kind of expand on the 3 sections that are listed here. So in regards to Section 10A, this establishes the non-degradation and enhancement policy for all the rivers. And so in order to achieve this policy, the administering agency must go ahead and document the baseline resource conditions and provide a monitoring plan and actually implement it in order to see changes over time. It also establishes that existing uses on the federal lands can continue where they do not conflict with river protection. It's also important to note that sort of this nuance that other existing uses, they're not necessarily like automatically grandfathered in, but if they don't degrade river values, they can be looked at on a case-by-case basis. But yeah, any sort of conflicting or degrading use that happens in the river that can be a potential threat to the values that are established would have to be resolved. So an example of this is found in the management plan for the Merced Wildland Scenic River in California. And so they identified a handful of threats to the values of the river. And so some of the actions they took in that corridor through the plan were to remove sections of riprap in the river corridor. They also added a few culverts to improve the connectivity of the watershed. They also had concerns regarding trampling on the riverbanks and a lot of erosion. So they decided to focus and direct some of the river access to more resilient sandy beaches. And then they used a few boardwalks to direct and manage the visitor use there. And so again, they identified potential threats to river values, and then they came up with strategies for resolution. And this is a prime example of how Section 10A applies for non-degradation and enhancement type work. Another example is found on the Notorious Scenic River in Oregon. And so there is specific direction for aquatic restoration and for riparian habitat as well. They also made provisions and strategies for developed and dispersed recreation. And so some of the things that they did there, management actions that they took specifically, were designating dispersed camping sites. They required use of established fire rings for visitors. And then they managed a few river trails and fishing access points and rehabilitated some of the disturbed areas that received some heavy use. And then they also closed a handful of roads to help stabilize the stream bank because they had fisheries value, and there was a lot of sedimentation happening in the river that was a threat to their habitat. So again, that's application of identifying future threats and then implementing strategies to protect those values. So we're going to do a little exercise, and it's just going to give you an opportunity to sit in the manager's seat and propose a solution for threats to values. And so we're going to take a closer look at recreational experiences on the North Umpqua Scenic River in Oregon. So for some background, the North Umpqua is well known for fly fishing and whitewater boating experiences. And so a lot of these activities draw many people. However, sometimes the whitewater boaters disrupt the fly fishing opportunity. And so in this case, this is a tricky situation because it seems like the enhancement of one activity could seemingly degrade another activity. And so we're going to provide a poll so you can choose a few options you think that maybe the managers could implement in that scenario. And then we'll identify which one they actually took and maybe why they did it and what it looked like when they implemented that option. So I'll let Angie pull up the poll for you guys.
I am about to launch it now. So what actions would you take as a river manager to address this conflict? And because of a character limit, I had to shorten some of these answers. So the first one is to establish regulations to ensure the highest quality fly fishing and whitewater boating experience. Second one is establish voluntary temporal and spatial guidelines to ensure the desired fly fishing and whitewater boating experience is protected. Third one is establish regulatory, temporal, and spatial guidelines to ensure the desired fly fishing and whitewater boating experience is protected. And D, establish regulatory and non-regulatory methods to ensure the desired fly fishing and whitewater boating experience is protected. Give it about 3 more.
Yeah, and sort of kind of help you distinguish. Oh, go ahead, Angie.
I was just going to say about 3 more seconds, and then I'm going to go ahead and close it.
Okay. Yeah, the distinguishing factor is like either are you providing a regulation or are you providing a guideline? And then if so, what's included? You know, are you encourage folks to recreate during a certain time or in a certain area? And then what would that look like? And then Angie can just let me know. Yeah.
All right, so I'm showing the answers now, and then I'm going to go back to close the poll and go back so we can see the answer that the managers on this river selected.
So I can see by the responses that there's probably a lot of wisdom here, and maybe some assumptions being made regarding how you can use both non-regulatory and regulatory methods to address the situation. And I think that can typically happen in a progression over time, maybe starting with non-regulatory and then moving into regulatory if necessary. So in this case, they started with answer B, by establishing voluntary temporal and spatial guidelines, guidelines for the recreators, and it's likely that they chose that so that they had a chance to do some relationship building to see if there would be compliance if they just provided more information to the recreators to see if they could kind of sort their use. But let me kind of go into more detail about what that looked like. So in this case, for visitors, they had voluntary guidelines, and they asked the boaters to avoid floating during July to October for essentially the nighttime, 6 p.m. to 10 a.m., a lot of fly fishers in evenings and mornings. And so that was where the highest potential for overlap between the rafting and fishing was. And then the boaters were also asked to avoid boating on one particular segment entirely from July to October, which also provided better fishing opportunities because they actually have visitors who come from all over the world to fish for summer steelhead. And so then they also made sure to provide information about the voluntary closure and any more suggestions to their floaters. And then they they did that in person-to-person conversations. They implemented some signage, and then they also have a really popular Wild and Scenic River Users Guide where they were able to update it with that information as well. So yeah, you know, information building, or I'm sorry, relationship building, and then sharing that information, you know, face to face and having good communication strategies when you're implementing a management action is really important. And then they just leaned into, you know, their desired conditions for each of those river values in this case. Now, another aspect that legal direction is provided for in the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is the river's classification. So this also provides additional guidance for what protection and management looks like on the river. And so there's a 3-tiered classification system which describes different levels of existing development on the river. And so the terminology that's used is wild, scenic, and recreational. And so each of these classifications is simply describing a level of development, wild being the least developed and recreational being the most developed relatively. And so oftentimes the level of development heavily impacts the types of activities that happen in a river corridor. And so that can provide guidance for the direction of the management plan. But it's important to note that no matter the classification, the protections provided in the Act remain. You know, the administration of the river could look slightly different, but the free-flowing condition, the water quality, and all of the ORVs are still provided the same level of protection. Now, another really critical part of the legal direction for Wild and Scenic Rivers is found in Section 7. And so Section 7 is really critical for protecting the free-flowing condition of Wild and Scenic Rivers because specifically it places restrictions on hydropower projects and other water resource projects on Wild and Scenic Rivers. So what's considered a water resource project? That's a good question. There's a whole flowchart for that actually. But more generally, a water resource project is either some or all of a hydropower project that could be licensed or exempted by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, you know, in consistency with the Federal Power Act, or it could be any other federally assisted, which is defined in a few different ways, federally assisted project that would affect free-flowing characteristics defined in Section 16B for rivers, the free-flowing character. And so when it comes to location of those projects, there's different standards used to evaluate them. But in order to learn more about this really critical part of the Law on Scenic Rivers Act, you can lean into Module 9. So when it comes to taking a closer look at Section 7 and what it implies, Section 7 provides guidance for a river administering agency to analyze those projects. And then they're also responsible for coming to a conclusion on whether that project is consistent with the river values or if it would degrade them. And so some examples are actually projects that are proposed by the river administering agency itself. So not all water resource projects are in conflict with the values of Law on Scenic Rivers. An example of those would be like habitat improvement projects, especially if there's a, you know, fisheries value or a bridge replacement project or something like that. So this section of the Act requires a lot of relationship building and again, relationship and a partnership with other federal agencies. And it's really critical for managers to be able to engage early and often with tribal and local governments. And by early, I mean early on in the project development process. Because otherwise projects can kind of get ahead of themselves before they've even been approved, and then it's really difficult, and sometimes if other politics come into play, if a project is really far along. But federal assistance for any of these projects includes loans, grants, permits, or licenses. So some of the agencies that are involved in this process, again, are U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they are responsible for authorizing any fill and removal activities below the ordinary high water mark, which is, you know, established kind of threshold for the main flowing area of the river. And then the Federal Highways Administration also funds State Department of Transportation projects like bridge replacements or upgrades, because there's a lot of, you know, transportation infrastructure along rivers. And then another group that tends to propose water resource projects on rivers that in some cases could be harmful to river values is private landowners. Because oftentimes they experience erosion of their property along the rivers. And so they tend to propose stream bank protection activities. And so building a strong relationship with local landowners and just talking about this process and, you know, coming to a conclusion on what types of projects can be, you know, beneficial both for the landowners and still protect the river values is important. And there was actually a guide developed for riverfront property owners by the Interagency Law on Scenic Rivers Coordinating Council, and that can be found on their website on rivers.gov. But it provides a really nice, digestible overview of Section 7. So in summary, in regards to protecting the values of the river, it's really critical to know their conditions, to be able to characterize, define, and describe those values so that we can apply these other policies and authorities with the justification that's found in those descriptions. And so the river is administered according to its classification, in accordance with its free-flowing condition, its water quality, and its outstandingly remarkable values. And it's important to protect all of these values from any adverse effects from proposed water resource projects. So we've touched on these a couple times, but just as a quick review, you can kind of read the question and see if I properly covered which river values are required to have a detailed description.
And we're not doing a poll for this one. This is just a quick think to yourself.
Right. Thanks, Angie. Yeah, the answer is D. Outstanding remarkable values, free flowing condition, and the water quality. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Bobbie, and she'll walk us through some of the other provisions that are provided in the Act, and then some specific agency guidance.
Thank you, Tangy. So as Tangy was saying, we're going to be talking about some other stuff that kind of ties in with the other provisions of the Act and agency guidance, and building off of what she said, the broad policy direction in sections 10, 2, and 7 of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act include other direction for managing designated rivers. These other sections provide direction regarding the contents of the comprehensive river management plan, level of access, and development depending on the river classification and lateral corridor boundaries, land acquisition limitations, and granting of easements, mineral withdrawal, and water rights as well. Each of these provisions may also be accompanied by additional management guidance from individual federal departments or agencies, or may be informed by council products. This section of the webinar focuses on how the additional direction in the Act agency developed management guidance is applied within the context of the CRMP. We'll also talk a little bit more about the interim management of rivers, which may not yet have a plan or final boundaries completed. So section 3 includes a specific direction for the contents of the CRMP through a 1986 agreement to the law. Congress outlined the general contents of a CRMP, including resource protection, guidance for development of federal lands and facilities, user capacities, and other management of federal lands, facilities, other management practices necessary for desirable to achieve purposes of this Act. Protecting river values commensurate with the intent of the Act requires development and subsequent implementation of the plan with a wide variety of other stakeholders, including state and local governments and partnership groups in a river basin. Utilizing the work of the Interagency Wild and Scenic Rivers Coordinating Council regarding the contents of key elements of the CRMPs. The Federal River Administrating Agency provide more specific guidance for plan development in their respective manuals and handbooks. This list of CRMP elements is found in the Council's technical report, the Wild and Scenic River Management Responsibilities. It is important for a river manager to understand the elements that should be addressed in a CRMP to ensure agency management actions will protect and enhance river values, whether or not the CRMP has been completed or for a designated river. As previously discussed, the agency classification system outlined in Section 2 of the Act and its further interpretation in the agency interagency guidelines provides the basis for the agency policy relative to transportation and facility development easements on federal lands and other actions within a designated river corridor. Congress directs the Federal River Administrating Agency to establish a boundary for each river designated under Section 3 of the Act. The Act also establishes a process by which the boundary is finalized, including publication of its availability in the Federal Register for public review. The lateral corridor is typically developed during the CRMP process. In the absence of a final boundary package submitted according to the Act, any applicable agency policy interim boundary of 1/4 mile will apply. Congress provides limited authority to acquire lands and interest in lands with designated river corridors in Section 6 of the Act. In some instances, for example, in wild and scenic rivers in the northeast that flow primarily through private lands, Congress limited agency authority to condemn or acquire lands by adding specific language to the enabling legislation. While acquisition from willing sellers is an appropriate tool on some rivers, there are numerous non-acquisition approaches to protect the river values. You can look at the Council's technical report, Protecting Resource Values on Non-Federal Lands, for discussion of these approaches. Please also note that the Section 8 withdraws public lands and acquired interests in lands within wild and scenic rivers corridor from entry, sale, or other disposition under the public land laws of the United States, except for exchange provisions in Section 6 and lease of federal lands in Section 14A. The CRMP for the North Umpqua identified several tracts of lands desirable to the acquire so as to better protect the scenery and other values of the river from future timber harvest. The planners qualified that such acquisition would be from willing sellers if funds were available and could be acquired through land exchange, purchase, or donation. Including this intent in the CRMP provides a useful framework for river administrating agency and potential partners in acquisition. In areas where mineral activity is permissible, the CRMP should address local leasable, sellable, and mineral materials within designated river corridors classified as wild river areas. The minerals located on a federal lands within the bed or banks, or 1/4 of the banks of any designated wild and scenic wild river, are withdrawn from all forms of appropriation under mining laws and from the operation of mineral leasing laws, subject to valid existing rights. For rivers designated under the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, this boundary is a 1/2 mile. Minerals within designated river corridors classified as scenic or recreation rivers are not withdrawn from mineral entry, although recognition of a withdrawal may be considered in the CRMP. Activities on existing valid claims and leases in river corridors classified as wild and mineral activities in the river corridor classified as scenic or recreational are subject to reasonable access and regulations to minimize, to the extent possible, adverse effects on river values. We have some links for agencies of guidance for BLM and U.S. Forest Service about this topic as well. I think they're provided in the handout. The Clackamas Comprehensive River Management Plan includes direction for no surface occupancy of the river corridor in any mineral lease and prohibits the development of sellable minerals such as sand and gravel within the river corridor. The Wild Scenic Rivers Act expressly reserves the quantity of water necessary to achieve its purposes, including protecting the values for which the river is designated. Effectively protecting this quantity of water requires a coordinated multi-step strategy. The first half of the strategy involves collecting data necessary to quantify the amount, timing, and location of the flows that are needed to support the ORVs. As a first step, the CRMP should describe in detail how the ORVs are related and independent upon flow. That discussion should identify any locations or times of year where that does not appear to be sufficient flow to fully support the identified ORVs and identify any trends in consumption of water usage that could further threaten the ORVs. The CRMP should also include a commitment to establish baseline flow conditions that are supporting the ORVs. This commitment may involve analysis of existing stream flow gauges or installation of new stream flow gauges. Finally, the CRMP should include a commitment to implement studies to identify the exact amounts, locations, timing of flows needed to support the ORVs. For example, a habitat study may be needed to quantify flow rates needed to support sensitive fish populations, or a recreational visitor survey may be needed to identify flow rates needed to support recreation boating. And that's actually something we're getting ready to start here at Niobrara. We're working on establishing an in-stream flow. The second half of the strategy to protect flows focusing on securing protection for flows. As a first step, you should contact your agency's legal counsel to identify when and where an opportunity will occur to submit a water right claim for the designated stream segment. Legal counsel can advise you on the exact information needed to submit a claim and what agency expertise will be needed to support the claim through the water right adjudication process. However, there are situations when an immediate opportunity does not exist to file a water right claim, or there may be an alternative protection strategies that require less effort than filing a water right claim. For example, you may be able to reach an operation agreement with an upstream reservoir operator to provide flows that will support ORVs, or you may be able to reach an agreement with water districts to limit groundwater usage that depletes stream flows. The CRMP should describe your overall flow protection strategy, but it should not go into the details of a legal strategy or operational agreements. These two examples we're going to talk about are going to highlight different water quality related situations a river manager might face. This first example, which is about Fossil Creek, is a river with an in-stream flow water right transferred to the Forest Service from a public utility after decommissioning of a hydropower plant project. As a result of this decommissioning, the river manager is securing baseline information from which to be more accurately describe the quality of water or quantity of water necessary to protect flow-dependent values and support a federal reserved water right under the Act. In contrast, the Upper Deschutes, this is a river with many existing water right holders and increasing demands for its water, requiring the river manager to develop a cooperative strategy to help restore flows. Prior to the decommissioning of the Charles Irving hydroelectric power plant in 2005, the entire base flow of Fossil Creek was diverted through a flume system for hydropower generation. Fossil Springs, a complex of more than 60 individual springs, produces flows ranging from 40 to 52 cubic feet per second, supporting the fourth largest travertine formation in North America. A diverse native fish community and a highly diverse aquatic riparian vegetation and associated wildlife species. To substantiate an in-stream flow water right application to protect these and other flow-dependent values, the U.S. Forest Service, working in partnership with the U.S. Geological Survey, installed a continuous recording flow gauge. This information will contribute substantially to understanding of how the flows from the incredible spring complex support the creek's flow-dependent values. It was signed by 18 different governmental or quasi-governmental authorities. The CRMP for the Upper Deschutes Wild and Scenic River included an adaptive management strategy for increasing winter and stream flows and reducing flow fluctuation over the long term. This voluntary approach recognized that management of the flows in the river can only be addressed with the willing participation of all appropriate authorities, including but not limited to the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, tribal governments, various state agencies, and the irrigation districts. The strategy includes a discussion of how additional water could become available for in-stream flows through a state and federal water conservation programs, the potential of water leasing, and the purchase from willing sellers. Experimental release rates from the upstream dam, and the identification of long-term targets for in-stream flows. We will focus on the remainder of the section of our module on agency-developed guidance for activities in the designated rivers. The guidance will have informed and appropriate been incorporated as the direction of the CRMP. In situations where a CRMP does not include specific direction or a CRMP has not been completed, a river manager needs to consider the intent of the classification and consult in their respective agency development guidance, which for the BLM is Manual 64,000 or 66,400, Section 7.5. In the next few slides, we'll provide you with a synopsis of some management guidelines for several of the topics shown here, followed by examples of how this guidance has been or direction has been applied to specific designated rivers. So this illustration, or this is going to illustrate the synopsis of agency management direction regarding transportation systems in different river classifications. New roads are generally incompatible in a wild river area areas, although a few existing roads may lead to boundary of the river, lead to the boundary of the river corridor. New roads may parallel a scenic river area for short segments or bridge the river. New roads may parallel a recreational river area, including bridges and river access. Such new construction must protect river values. New trail construction is permissible in a wild, scenic, or recreational river area, with non-motorized uses the norm in wild classification. New airfields are generally prohibited or restricted in wild river areas, but are permissible in scenic and recreation river areas, given they are compatible with protecting river values. Here are two examples of how this general guidance has been incorporated into one in more specific direction for a designated river. In the wild portion of the Rogue River, heliports and helispots will be established only as needed for emergency administration. The CRMP for the main, West Little, and North Fork of the, I am not going to say that name right. Andy, can you help me out?
Yeah, the Owyhee.
Owyhee, thank you. Wild and Scenic River includes the agency's intent to enhance river values by closing and rehabilitating the formerly private land airstrips in the Morrison Ranch and the Hole in the Ground. Focusing now on recreation development, agency management guidelines providing minimum facilities in wild river areas consistent with the classifications to maintain essentially primitive shorelines. A range of public use and administrative facilities may be provided in scenic recreation areas so long as each protects or enhances values and is located and designated to harmonize with natural and cultural settings. As an example of recreational direction in a CRMP, consider the Wild and Scenic River in Oregon, where only minimum public use facilities are to be developed within the corridor. The CRMP specifies facilities, development of a semi-private camping area at one of the principal access sites on the river, including installation of permanent toilet facilities and additional fire rings to concentrate camping use. At another site, the CRMP directs development of a permanent visitor ranger station, also with improved toilet facilities, public picnic tables, and fire rings for the physically challenged. Agency management guidelines for wildlife and fish projects provide for construction of the structures and vegetation management to protect and enhance habitat as long as such activities are designed to harmonize with the intent of the classification and protect other values. In wild river areas, constructed structures should be minor, and in all three classifications, any portion of the project that has the potential to affect the river's free-flowing condition must be evaluated as a water resource project and comply with Section 7 of the Act. Direction for fish habitat was incorporated into the CRMP for the North Fork of the Middle Fork of the Willamette Wild and Scenic Rivers in Oregon. Specifically, the plan identified habitat restoration needs by segment based on a detailed comparison of historic conditions to the present day. This assessment provides the basis for subsequent site-specific proposals to reintroduce large wood to increase habitat complexity, recreate pools, and restore natural trail processes. Vegetation management guidelines limit the cutting and eradication of trees and other vegetation except when associated with providing a primitive recreation experience, including clearing trails and to protect users and the environment. A range of vegetation management, including timber harvest, is permissible in the scenic and recreation river areas, provided that such activities are designed to protect and restore or enhance the river environment. An example of an activity consistent with these guidelines is from the Ottawa National Forest in Michigan. Based on the desired conditions in the Wild and Scenic River CRMP, a timber harvest activity was proposed in a recreation segment of the river. The project was designed to create age class diversity and thereby to enhance the river scenic value and desired recreation experience over time. So we introduce you to other provisions of the Act and agency management guidance to provide direction to help and enhance these river values. An understanding of this direction provides a river manager the necessary framework for managing rivers with an established CRMP, or for updating a CRMP to fill in gaps. For rivers without a CRMP, it is useful to know there is ample guidance to help river manager understand how to evaluate potential projects to ensure their consistency with the intent of the Act. So we've talked about the other provisions in the Act, some details. We're going to kind of go into our conclusion now. Being a key player in protecting and enhancing the values of the river in the National Wild and Scenic River System is an amazing opportunity. There are a few places that have more relevance or are more important to the people everywhere than rivers. They are the lifeblood of entire watersheds, and they stir people's passions in truly incredible ways. We have shared elemental components that will provide you with the basis for ensuring any actions taken with the river corridor are consistent with the clear intent of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. These are the tools you can use to make a difference in whatever wild and scenic river you may be honored to help manage. So any questions?
Yeah, we have a few minutes for questions, and you know, I still have problems saying the names of rivers out east. I think it took me over 100 times of saying the Rivanna River before I got it correct. So,
yeah, I'm having a hard time with names and stuff today.
No worries. And before I moved to Oregon, I didn't know how to pronounce a lot of the river names out here. One question I did see in the question box was wondering what would be a situation that a wild and scenic river would not have a CRMP. I don't know if either of you could be able to or could answer to that.
I can speak to that a little bit. So, partnership rivers have unique requirements for the development of planning efforts and documenting that. And I don't think that it's the exact same requirements for the other types of designated rivers that are state administered or administered by a federal land management agency. But the case with most of them is that the ones that don't have them are simply delayed. They're in the process of being developed or have not yet been developed.
Right, I know that some of the rivers designated through the Dingle Act in 2018 are still working on CRMPs, and so they might not have those official yet, for example. Another question, one that I've not seen before, Sheena asked, or stated, so we have an international transboundary wild and scenic river. Is there language in the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act that touches on the management of the wild and scenic river when a portion originates in another country? And then Sheena also added that they do have an MOU that addresses some, but not all of the things that may impact wild and scenic river status. But to my knowledge, I've not heard of specific language within the Act that touches on international relations. Do either of you?
I don't remember seeing it in the Act, but I do think that there was some kind of agreement made with one of the rivers, either in the Northeast or in Oregon, because it deals with the river that goes into Canada. I'll see if I can find that.
Awesome. We can follow up with you there, Sheena. And I know we're pretty much at our time, so I just want to say thanks again to today's presenters. They covered a ton of important information in a really short amount of time. So if you need to, you can follow up with us. You can also go back and watch the recording. As I mentioned, it will have a PDF copy of all the slides as well as the handout. And just to remind you, we will be having our second webinar in this series on February 16th. That one's going to focus specifically on partnership wild and scenic rivers. There's a lot of them out east, not so much out west, but that doesn't mean that they can't that the model can't be used out west. So if you're interested in learning more about the partnership Wild and Scenic River Model, I encourage you to join. And then also we've got some other events going on with RMS. I highly encourage you to check out our events calendar. You'll find out some more information about some upcoming river management roundtables, which are free and open to all. We've got one on January 25th, just next week, where we're going to be looking at building teams. What does your team look like? What are some skills, or what are some what kind of awareness can you bring to build the skills of your team? And then on February 8th, we're also going to be looking at water trail maps and river maps. Do you have one? What makes a great one? We've got a couple great river map experts joining us for that presentation as well. And there's a whole lot more details again on our website. To join the river management roundtables, you do have to register, but they are free and open to all. And I have not seen any other questions come in. So with that, guess we'll go ahead and close it out. But again, a huge thank you to today's presenters and to all of you for joining us. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.